Hi, everybody. This is Marlene. I wanted to let you know that I edited the audio of the entire show to remove the scenes where I'm out trying to challenge the ambient noise, and of course, I lost. And I know this wouldn't make much sense to those of you who are listening to the podcast, so I wanted to let you know ahead of time. But if you do want to see the entire show, you can go to YouTube and look us up at Miami Ghost Chronicles, and there you can see it in its entirety. Thank you so much for listening. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. And today I'm going to bring you a very interesting story about a little town. Basically, it's more like an intersection here in Central Florida called Yeehaw Junction. Okay? And at first glance, you think, well, basically, this is a four ways, kind of slanted four ways out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm going to give you some history, everything about it, because there's much more to it than just meets the eye. A lot of people have done information or little mini documentaries about the about a little motel restaurant that's sat at that intersection, which is called the Desert Inn. It's gone by a lot of names, and I'm going to explain to you about that. But when you look at the actual history of that land, which is of course where everything starts, you're going to see like at everything that's really where it starts at, okay? Which eventually leads sometimes to paranormal happenings. You know, at first glance, people just look at the most recent things that happen, when in truth, there's much more to it than just what meets the eye or what you see in recent times. So I'm going to let you see a little video of me trying, and I say trying, to kind of do a prequel to an investigation that I wanted to do there at the Desert Inn. And you know, that's one of those things that you don't really think about what you're going to do, because it was me against the traffic, and the traffic won. But anyway, I want to let you guys see it as the introduction, okay, to what is really a very, very interesting area there in Central Florida that at first glance looks like nothing special. But in truth, it's very, very interesting and mysterious. So hold on, take a look. Okay, you see what I mean? I lost. I was out there and it was a losing battle. But anyway, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of background about the history of the land. And the reason why I say that is that whether you're looking at the supernatural, the paranormal aspect of a case, of a location, inevitably you always find something tied into the land. Basically, this is what sets up the stage for when things start to happen. You know, and then there's a pattern, and you know, eventually you will have people that remember, others don't, others forget. But when you do the research, this is how you realize, wow, this stuff was happening for quite a while. And then when you dig a little bit deeper, the best place to start is at the beginning. At the very beginning, who was out there? Okay. Now, first of all, Okay, believe it or not, a lot of people think of the cowboys as being like out west. Well, guess what? Not really, because out in Florida, we had cowboys, or what became known as Florida cracker cowmen. Okay, but how this happened was that the Florida cracker, okay, originally referred to either colonial era English and American pioneer settlers and their families in what eventually became the state of Florida. Now, most of these first arrived in 1763 after Spain traded Florida to Great Britain. Okay, a lot of people who are familiar with Florida know about St. Augustine, which was, of course, the area which is now Florida originally belonged to Spain. Now, when this happened, in Florida, those who owned or worked the cattle traditionally became called cowmen. Now, by the late 1800s, they were either called cow hunters, and this reference came about because they would be searching for these cattle that were scattered all over the rangelands during the roundups. And at that time also the term cowman and cracker was used interchangeably depending on who was talking about it. Now, the cracker cowboy, just to let you know, the Florida cow hunter or cracker cowboy is totally different from the Spanish, what they call a vaquero, or the Western cowboy, what people think of as out in the Western United States. First of all, the Florida cowboys, they didn't use lassos to herd or, capture the cattle there. Usually they used cow whips and dogs. The use of the cow whips is why they got that name of cracker, because they would crack these whips in order to herd these cattle. Also, the horses they used were smaller than the Western breeds, and they even had a specific cattle called the cracker cow, all right, known as native or scrub cows, and they averaged about 600 pounds, and so on and so forth. So anyway, there was an entire culture that developed in that area of Florida, central, northern Florida, even though they traded down further south, with not only the people that worked it, the land, the cattle, everything. Now, Florida, in other words, developed their own style of ranching because of the area. Okay, it was totally different because remember, we have swamps, marshy, then we have scrubland. So they developed a style to the environment. And the reason why I'm telling you this is that I want you to understand who are the people that inhabited this area and how a lot of things went on. All right. Now, believe it or not, by 1700, a lot of people don't realize that Florida goes this far back. Besides the Spaniards had it, there was about 34 ranches and about 20,000 head of cattle. Just to give you an idea, and the reason why I state this is everybody thinks of ranching and cattle as like Texas, the Midwest, further out west, and this was thriving since 1700 in Florida. Okay, they had what they called wild cattle, and then they bred it with other stock that they got from the Spanish, and even the Seminole Indians, which were the natives that had inhabited that part of Florida. They were also involved in working the cattle. All right. As a matter of fact, they had a leader called Cowkeeper. Okay, that he was out there like between 1710 to 1783. All right, and they were one of the major livestock producers through most of the 1700s. Now, the British, held Florida like from 1763 to 1783, and they also had, the English planters that came. They also had herds, and also the Creek Indians were in West Florida. All right, so. Like I said, the U.S. took possession of Florida in 1821. And just so you'll understand, because this is a setting, it was described as vast, untamed wilderness, plentifully stocked with wild cattle. And Florida scrub or cracker cattle, because that's what they were called, were descended from this mix of Spanish and British breeds. They were very hardy to basically everything that the environment offered. All right? Now, the reason why I say this is I'm now going to describe to you about a little, I want to say it's a restaurant, motel, bordello that exists over there at that junction, at that crossroads called Yeehaw Junction, which again went by a lot of different names. Okay, so you can understand why now it has a reputation of being haunted. Okay, because these were the majority of the people that lived out there and frequented this particular location because, of course, this was the middle of nowhere. It's even kind of a little bit of the middle of nowhere now. So can you imagine 200 years ago? This became like all crossroads. This is where everybody met. Whether you were going south, or you were going north, whether you had cattle with you, whether you were coming back from selling cattle, or you had some other type of, business doings. This is where everybody met. So, of course, like everything where everybody usually meets, a lot of things happen. Some of it usually not so savory. Okay, so again, here we go. And like I said, this little area, this corner that it sits on the northwest corner of that intersection. That now now it's known as Yeehaw Junction. Well, at that corner sits what's called the Desert Inn, also known as Wilson's Corner now, and it sits. Those two roads are US 441 and Highway 60. All right, and like I said, it started out basically as a resting stop for the cattle drives. Also, there was a depot for the Flagler's East Coast Railway. Originally, it wasn't a two floors, but this upstairs eventually was used as a bordello. All right. Now, by the time 1881, there was a project that was started to take back even more land that was submerged. Okay, and what helped was when the Florida East Coast Railway, they start bringing timber into this area. Okay, now that's around the time that they developed a motel site. Okay, because guess what? It was where people need to eat and sleep. That's usually what happens. There was also at one point, they say, a sawmill at the site. Now, supposedly this establishment started, like I said, around the late 1880s, and at that time the first recorded owner was called Consolidated Land Company. Now, between 1970 to 1930, okay, like I said, business people, moonshiners, traders, lumbermen, Indians, as well as the cowboys moving cattle from the Kissimmee River to places north to the Indian reservations or south. Yeehaw was the only watering hole. All right, and it was also during the 1930s that roads were constructed, which made travel easier. But believe me, didn't stop them even before. Now, I have two dates. I have some information that says that there was a bordello way before the turn of the century, and then there was another one that says that during the 1930s, when they put down the paved roads, which made it easier for people to travel on automobiles, like regular people going, businessmen going over to the west coast of Florida, that's when the bordellos started operating out of there. But I think that earlier date is probably more accurate, because these cowboys, these crackers, all these workers, I can see that absolutely when this started going back in the 1880s into the 1890s, there was probably some version of a bordello being run out of there. Okay, and of course, like I said, this is where the truckers, travelers, this is where they wanted to get food, a drink, get entertained. Now, eventually, they had a few cabins, okay, that were built out in the back to accommodate the occasional tourists. And by this, when I say tourists, this was not your merchants or your businessmen or your crackers, okay, that were going out towards the Gulf Coast of Florida from going east to west. Now, back in the 1930s, there was a guy by the name of Dad Wilson who bought this property, and he kind of fixed it up to be a little bit more than a shack. Now, the stories that are told is that he was a railroad hobo who was kicked off the train in what later became Yeehaw Junction. Remember, there was a train depot here, okay, and that he borrowed. I use that term loosely. He borrowed lumber from the railroad, and also there was another guy named Bory who had a sawmill very close to the restaurant, and supposedly Dad Wilson and Bory, even they had their differences. What he did was he took that lumber he borrowed and he improved or made more of it than a shack. Also in the 1930s, there was a dance hall in the back of the property, and that burned down and then was rebuilt, a dance hall. Okay, I hope you're getting a picture of what life was like out here. Now, after Wilson, got this property in the 30s, there's been 6 other owners, according to the records. Okay, and some of them were there for a few years, some of them were there very, very little. Okay, now, back in 1946, the owners were a Fred and Julie Chevrolet. Okay, now check this out. There was no water or electricity at this place till 1978. 1978, folks. This is when it got full service. And what Fred Chevrolet did was he had a 450-foot well put in at the Desert Inn, and a generator for the electricity, which, by the way, the other locals shared some of the power. See where I'm going with this? Now, despite the anti-prostitution laws, the brothel kept working until the mid-1970s. In other words, they got electricity and the prostitutes went out. I don't know, what a trade-off. Now, when it was, like I said, what happened was when they added that second floor, which you could probably either in the video or behind some of the pictures that I'm showing, that was where they were running the brothel out of. And finally it was shuttered, and now it serves occasionally as a bedroom and a storage space, which, by the way, is one of the locations where there's a lot of hauntings reported, upstairs. Another thing that also became known for was that Dad Wilson also brought jackasses. He had about 100 acres out there, okay, and then other people, other subsequent owners also kept the jackasses, the little burros, okay. Now, another thing that you have to understand, before, this area also had a segregated dining room in the back, okay, which now is the restaurant office, okay. And because a lot of people don't realize that even back then, for all the time that this location existed out there, which is what all the business did back then, they segregated their customers. All right. Now, like I said, the Yeehaw Railroad Depot, okay, again, it was everything. People came there not only with horses and cattle, but by train. There was a depot there. And at one point, they were calling it Crossroads. And then sometimes they called it the Desert Inn. And then other times, some people referred to it as Jackass Crossing, or just a crossing. And it's kind of murky as to how it ended up being called Yeehaw Junction. Okay. One of the stories is that when Standard Oil wanted to put their station on the map, they wanted to give it a name, and Jackass Crossing was not going to cut it. So that's when they kind of played with that name. And then also when they did the turnpike, which is a paid road here in Florida, a toll road in the 50s, they needed an exit so that the Greyhound bus line could stop. And they named it Yeehaw Junction out there. Okay, but supposedly a lot of people still call that place Jackass's Crossing, and other names, which I'm going to tell you. All right. Now, again, the Jackass Crossing became because there were herds of donkeys and mules that were used by these ranchers who crisscrossed this highway. Okay, and again, back then when people were more conservative, nobody wanted to name it Jackass Crossing. All right, but now this is when things get interesting. Some of the people still refer to the nickname of Malfunction Junction. You know why? Because there's so many car accidents that riddle this 2-lane highway. All right, I'm going to tell you more about that in a little bit. Okay, now what happens is, let's fast forward. As you can see, all right, Uh, this place has a very rich history. Okay, it's just not the Crossroads. There've been other little businesses there. Okay, but this one is the one that's been there the longest. Different versions of it, buildings being added, but okay, now imagine no electricity, not really, till 1978. All right, and it's still there. Well, of course it's improved, but it kept business going even though it was so remote because, again, because of its location and the crossroads. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the ghosts at the Desert Inn, because that's what it's called now, at the Desert Inn. Okay, but you're going to see that area, it's just not the Desert Inn, has weird goings-ons. You're going to see it's more to it. Like I said, that's why I started off with the land, because 9 times out of 10, that's exactly where it starts at. So anyway, okay, so like I said, it's been there since the 1880s. Now, you have to understand, over the years, there was a lot of deaths connected to this area because there was bar fights, gun fights, that bar fights has turned into shootouts, automobile accidents, okay, which you saw that name that it had, Malfunction Junction. And from what I understand, once, this is of course with the advent of the automobile, a lot of these accident victims were taken into that inn for shelter, okay, because this was in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of them died there before medical help arrived. All right, now that was just run-of-the-mill accident stuff. All right, now no less than 5 people have died upstairs, in the upstairs, what they call the brothel area. Okay, one of them, for example, was around the 1900s. A man hung himself because he was jilted by a lover. Makes you wonder if the one that jilted him was even a prostitute, because you know what, some of these guys that were really lonely, they kind of formed these romantic attachments to the prostitutes. Bottom line, he ended up hanging himself from upstairs because of after being jilted. Okay, now in the 1990s, another man hung himself from a ceiling pipe upstairs. Okay. Again, and this is the thing. One of the former owners, which by now she's already passed away. Her name was Beverly Zychek. Okay, she was at one point considered the unofficial mayor of Yeehaw Junction because she had been there for so long. And what she would do is she would allow her employees, if they had a late night there at the restaurant and they had to get up early, to go upstairs and sleep upstairs so that they wouldn't have to drive, and fall asleep at the wheel. Well, guess what? After they started doing that, a lot of them never came back to do it again because they would hear so many things moving, rustling, that some of them just said, "Thanks, Beverly, but no thanks. I'd rather drive home, okay, than stay upstairs," because they would hear so many things. Now, some of the things they heard was pacing, shuffling feet, doors opening. There's one room where the desk supposedly moves from one end, a heavy desk, by the way, moves from one end of the room to the other. Now, in the back, there was also some additional cabins that were built. In room number 5, they had a lady who checked in for the weekend. This was recently. What I mean, it's not like way back then. And when the cleaning crew came in on Monday, they found she had committed suicide by shooting herself in the head. I don't know how she pulled that off, that nobody heard the shot. But again, in room 6, which is right next to that, another young man died in a fire after, which he lit because he fell asleep with a cigarette. Okay, so, and I didn't, in one of the pictures, you're going to see that I'm seated next to some Indian figures that are in the dining room. Okay, you're not going to believe it. Well, I was doing that. There was a couple there who were dining. And they kind of found out that I was going to do this about Yeehaw Junction and everything. The girl comes up to me. And she wasn't kidding, by the way. I looked at her. She tells me, "Those are mummies." And I looked at her and I said, "What do you mean they're mummies?" because to me they look like, like dummies. Like, I mean, you could tell their features were made not to be your regular stuff that you see in the that you purchase. I was like, and she was perfectly serious. I don't know if there's any truth to it. I don't think there is, and I said, because as you could tell, it's a man, it's a woman, and she has a baby on the backboard, and she said, yeah, I don't know if there's any truth to that, but she told me that after I sat next to them. So, and then there was another one that you're going to see. There's a picture when you go into the woman's bathroom. There's a figure of a dummy there in the corner they call George, okay, that will basically take a few years off your life when you walk in there. Yeah, I guess they get a kick out of hearing women scream all the way in the dining room of the restaurant. But anyway, yes. Okay, so there's the setup, okay, of what goes on just there at that location. Now, I am going to go ahead and tell you about all the other interesting things that happen there at the Crossroads of Yeehaw Junction. Okay. Now, I'm going to start off with a series of accidents, which, by the way, that prior owner, Beverly Zychek, she even made comments about how many accidents occur there. And when she said that, she wasn't kidding when I looked up some of the data. And what I'm going to talk about is just off the top, which, you could think of, well, it's inevitable, But, and by the way, these did not occur. I know a lot of people might think that I'm looking at stuff that happened on the turnpike, that toll road. No, I'm talking about the ones that happened there on US 441 and State Road 60, which is that intersection. Okay, so anyway, what happens is, I'm gonna walk this back. As you could tell, I put it even back in 1954. I put on there on the slides, there was a woman killed. There was another accident where somebody plowed into 10 people riding their horses. Okay, riding their horses. Now, back in 1994, plane crash right there in that area, wiped out 8 people. All right, it just went down. Now, another thing which I found was a little bit disturbing was back in 2002, the Pentagon disclosed that in 1968, scientists had been conducting tests in the area to see if they could kill part of Russia's wheat crop with wheat rust. Okay. These were called 27 biological and chemical weapons tests. They put this information out in 2002 that they had done it in 1968. Okay, this was during, of course, the Cold War. Guess what? Nobody in that area knew that this was going on. All right, which gives you food for thought about, lucky place to be at. Anyway, in 2003, 2 people in an SUV were killed right there on State Road 60. There was a crash, and basically the vehicle had a blowout, and it collided with a tractor trailer. It had been raining on State Road 60, and by the way, that there is a lot of those tractor trailers that run on that area. Okay, back in 2003, they had another guy who died of hit and run injuries. Okay, same thing. He was going westbound in his Ford pickup, and I guess they don't know if he either skidded out or had a blowout, got out of his truck on the side of the road, and basically he was found on the side of the road. And what they're thinking is that he was hit by a passing vehicle. That's never been solved. Now, like I said, the old owner, Beverly, she back in 2004, she talks about that she's complaining to Florida Highway Patrol, which usually is the law enforcement agency that goes out there to handle the accidents, about how many nasty crashes they have out there. Because she's telling that the streets are aligned wrong. Okay? And to quote her, she said the whole intersection is cattywampus. Okay? And this is that she says she was kept on seeing so many accidents there, and she's telling them, you guys need to fix it. And she even stated she was losing business because people were afraid to pull in and out of the restaurant. So being there, I'm sure, and she was one of these owners that was there for quite some time. So I'm sure she saw more than what she thought was a normal amount of accidents. Back in 2004, another man was killed out there on State Road 60. And what happened with him, he went head first into a tractor trailer. And they're thinking that he fell asleep at the wheel. Back in 2005, another man was killed on State Road 60. And what he basically did was he drove his van right into the back of a car that was that had just stopped because of traffic right there. And because what happens is that when you come to that crossroads, you better be paying attention to who's supposed to be allowed to go through. Because if not, you could find yourself in a really bad accident. Apparently, he didn't realize that the traffic in front of him had stopped, and he plowed into whoever was in front of him, and he died back in November of 2005. Okay, a 46-year-old guy. His pickup truck hit another person. He died right there at the scene. And he just drove right into the path of a pickup. Again, you might think, because a lot of people use these roads, like I said, for traveling. Even now, what happens is people don't sleep and they fall asleep at the wheel, and that's what happens, that they end up driving into the path of oncoming vehicles. Now, back in January of 2006, there was a woman, and this was what they considered a single vehicle accident. She was a woman trucker. Okay, she was driving a tractor trailer eastbound on State Road 60, and they thinking that she swerved in order to avoid hitting a hog. Yes, I said a hog, a pig. Basically, she lost control of the truck and it overturned, and she was trapped there. And they're not really sure if she was wearing a seatbelt or not, because a lot of after looking at this, a lot of the people that end up dying, it's because they're not wearing a safety belt. And back in April of 2007, they had two brothers who were injured when right there at the Desert Inn when a fire started inside their room. Okay, these were twin brothers that were staying there, and the employees had to basically take care of the fire, and one of them apparently got pretty hurt. But anyway, okay, that's just so you'll understand what goes on just with vehicles alone. Okay, and that's what's been recorded. All right. Now, what would any area be without a serial killer? Of course, this area has a serial killer. Not in and of itself this area, but this is where he was dumping the body parts at. Body parts. Okay, let me tell you about this guy. His name was David Allen Gore, and he was doing this with his cousin named Fred Waterfield. They were called criminal cousins, and what they did was they took to hunting women down in the early 1980s. And what's frightening is that Gore served as an auxiliary sheriff's deputy, which of course made it a lot easier to pull this off. Now, most disturbing of all, their first rape victim was Fred's sister. Okay, and David helped hold her down as Fred raped his own sister. So, of course, it's only downhill from here. Okay, now, Waterfield, who looks like he was the mastermind at first glance, offered Gore $1,000 for each pretty girl he could bring back. Now, their first murder victims were Yeehaw Ling, age 17, and her mother, Hsiang Huang Ling. And what they did was in February of 1981, Gore, using his auxiliary police badge, accosted Ying Ling, which is a 17-year-old, and he lures the teenager back to his truck, drives her to her home. Now, once he's there, he kidnaps both the daughter and the mother. Remember, he's bringing these victims back, not only so that he could do something to them, but also for Fred Waterfield. All right. What he does is this is later on. He claims that, he tied the mother to a tree, slowly chokes her to death while Fred Waterfield rapes the daughter. Now, both of them dismember both of these women and stuff their body parts into oil drums, which they bury. You know where they buried them, right? You got spoiler here. Yeah, they later on, once they're caught in the area a little bit further east from where Yeehaw Junction is at, is where they were getting rid of some of these bodies. Now, next, Waterfield tells him, "I want a blonde." Okay, so what Gore does is there's a lady by the name of Judith Daly. She's 35 years old, and she used to live in that area at Fort Pierce, and she's visiting from California. And in July of 1981, what he does is, she is leaving the area. He disables her car on purpose, at the beach, and he offers her a ride to the nearest telephone. What he then does is he drives her to a secluded area where he meets Fred Waterfield. Then they rape her, and what they do is Gore claims that he does Fred a favor, I guess, and he disposes of the body in the swamp for the alligators to feed on. Her body's never been found. Now, 1 week after they kill Judith Daly, David Gore unsuccessfully attempts to abduct the teenage girl, again by using his auxiliary badge. Now, the girl's father, he files a complaint, and thankfully they strip him of his badge. Now, a few days later, police spot Gore hiding in the backseat of a woman's car, carrying a police scanner, handcuffs, and a pistol. Now, at this point, they arrest him and they convict him of armed trespassing and sentence him to 5 years in prison. But guess what? He's released on parole in March of 1983. This is not the first time that I see that these really horrible men, people, whatever you want to call them, it's like, all right, perpetrators are released and they go right back to what they were doing before. So again, he's released on parole in March. By May of 1983, both of them, they hook up with two girls that are hitchhiking from Orlando, Florida, by the names of Angela Lavalle and Barbara Ann Byer. Both of them are age 14. They pick them up, rape them, kill and dismember both of them. Now, these eventually are the only two crimes for which Fred Waterfield is convicted. And he was convicted to 2 consecutive life sentences for those 2 murders. Now, next on their list was Lynn Elliott, age 17, and Reagan Martin, age 14. They're both students at Vero Beach High School, and they're hitchhiking to Wabasso Beach. And they picked these girls up in July of 1983. Now, they took both of these girls to a house owned by Gore's parents. Now, what happens is Fred Waterfield leaves right after this because he's spooked because he saw his sister during the drive over there. I don't know if this was a sister he was raped, but okay, so he leaves. Now, later on, after the fact, Gore tells the police that what he did was he tied up and placed the girls in different rooms before raping them. Now, as he's assaulting Reagan Martin, this is the 14-year-old, the other girl, Lynn Elliott, who's nude and with her hands tied behind her back, escapes, and she's going down the driveway and she loses her footing. He's running after her, and catches up to her. Now, what happens is he drags her back, and of course she's fighting him, so he throws her to the ground and he shoots her in the head. Shot her twice in the head. Now, guess what? A neighbor boy who's riding his bicycle sees the entire thing. He calls the police. All right. There's like a 90-minute standoff between him and the police, and of course they arrest him, and they rescue the other girl, Reagan Martin, a 14-year-old who was found in the attic naked, bound to the rafters by handcuffs and with electrical cords tied around her legs. All right. Now, when David Gore is arrested, he quickly turns on his cousin and he spills the beans. He describes their criminal history in detail, and of course Waterfield is caught, and both of them are convicted of rape murder. And Gore receives a death sentence, and Waterfield got 2 life sentences. I don't know why. I never did as much research to see in the transcripts why they were sentenced so differently, but maybe this was part of it. Now, by the end of 1983, in December of 1983, Gore leads police to the remains of 3 of his 6 murder victims. Okay, these were the victims: Barbara Ann Byer, Hsiang Huang Ling, and her daughter, Yinghua Ling. And he admits to killing these girls and the 2 women. Of course, through all these interviews, the investigation that follows, they uncover basically evidence that Gore had killed 6 women between February of 1981 and July of 1983. Most of them were raped, some were tortured, some were dismembered and buried in hidden graves in those citrus groves, which I said were just east of Yeehaw Junction. In this area, there's a lot of the citrus groves are out there. Now, of course, the discovery leads to Gore being convicted of murdering Barbara Ann Byer, Angelica LaValle, Judy K. Daly, the Mrs. Ling and her daughter, and he was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms that were tacked onto his death sentence. Okay, now, Waterfield was convicted of manslaughter in Elliott's death and sentenced to 15 years in prison, and he was found guilty of first-degree murder for Byer and LaValle, and he got the 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. At this time, Waterfield, he's filed numerous appeals to the manslaughter conviction. Apparently, it hasn't worked. Now, in April of 2012, David Gore was executed by lethal injection, and he died right after, about 10 minutes after they administered the injection. Now, this is incredible. In a book in 2012, he wrote, what he was doing was, there is a gentleman who was selling letters that men on death row, men or women, I guess, on death row were sending to him. He was selling them. And there was a book in 2012 which contained letters from David Gore, graphically describing his abductions, the torture and killings that he had admitted to. Guess what? What that got him is that they moved his execution ahead of 399 other Florida death row inmates. Sometimes they stay the execution. Well, the governor said, oh, wait a minute. So, and of course he had become religious by the time he died, and he offered an apology to the family members of the girls he killed, which I guess didn't. And what's really interesting, I thought, was of course, the family members of these victims are very happy to see him executed. That Waterfield's family think that basically that he lied about Waterfield's Fred's involvement in all these attacks and murders, and that basically he's been falsely convicted and is serving these life sentences, unjustifiably, because he lied about it. Like I said, the name of that book was The Serial Killer Whisperer. And as a matter of fact, the one that that put that together. One of the correspondent was a gentleman by the name of Eric Gein out of Jacksonville, and he said that Gore seemed proud of his killings, but he said that at some point he even lost interest after 2001 because they fell out of touch. And what he said was, I was getting really tired of Gore's letters because he would write the same thing about slicing this person. He said, and it got monotonous and old. In other words, it's incredible. Now, what I was saying before, Fred Waterfield had twin daughters, and when Gore was executed, they said that they were glad that he was dying because they said that he was to blame for falsely linking their dad to the murders, resulting in his 2 consecutive life sentences. And I quote, "He took away our pillar, our father, who was everything to us." I don't know. I'm out on that one, folks. I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole because I don't know. I said without reviewing the actual transcripts, it's hard to believe. Okay, now I'm going to give you a little bit of information about what happens, what's so different, what's so paranormal, what's so supernatural about Crossroads. Okay? Because sometimes you think a lot of these occurrences are accidental. Not really. I don't think so. And if you're going to see that historically, Crossroads do have, in most cases, a very, very negative connotation attached to them. All right? And makes you think it can't all be by mistake. Okay. Oh, before I get to that, just so you know, so we're talking about killing fields. All right. Back in 1986, November of 1986, about 2 miles right there from that intersection where the Desert Inn is at, they found some skeletal remains, which have yet to be identified, by the way, of a man they estimate to be about 50 to 70 years old. By the time they found him in 1986, he had been out there for 5 years. So he died. He was put out there like in 1981. Okay, and characteristics that they could gather from the skeleton was that he had a healed fracture of the nasal bone. He probably had a long-standing problem with his back, and he was probably right-handed, and he had pronounced arthritis in the right shoulder. I guess they recovered the entire skeleton. Another thing, no teeth. Okay, he had lost all his teeth, which didn't appear to be something recent. And these bones were found in an open field. I don't see anything here what the cause of death is, but apparently nobody's skeleton ends out in a field in the middle of nowhere for no other reason than it was placed there. Possibly, again, he was the victim of foul play, but as of right now, they haven't identified him at all. And in the slides you're going to see there's a drawing, I guess an artist composite of what he possibly looked like. Now in 2003, another lady by the name of Heather Plunkett, 29 years old, she's shot to death by her boyfriend Greg Morris after revealing to him that she's HIV positive and they had been having unprotected sex. What he does is he kills her in a bathtub at some friend's house, and he gets these 2 friends to help him. Okay, and they wrap her in a green pool table protective cover, stick her in the trunk of his Oldsmobile, and they kind of like burn all this other stuff. Now they drive out to Yeehaw Junction, and they dump the body in a tall grass down a shell rock road. Out there's phosphate mines, and apparently this was an area of a phosphate mine that had already been closed down. Now she's out there for 3 years without being identified. Okay, and eventually, due to through her dental records, they're able to identify who she is, and of course, you work it back from there. Who is she associating with, so on and so forth. Which, by the way, those 2 friends of the guy that killed her, Greg Morris, one of them, the lady, she went to jail, or is still presently in jail for having killed with her son, her teenage son, an acquaintance of theirs. Wow. Okay, so there you go, right there. You're seeing Oh, before I get to the Crossroads, I forgot. This is good. Guess what? Of course, they have UFOs. I mean, what else is missing? Just to give you an idea, back in January of 72, these are short descriptions of what people are saying that they saw out there. Somebody traveling south from Yeehaw Junction sees two bright lights appearing up on the right side of the sky. Then a third one joins it. Now, this person is describing where all these UFOs are traveling in a single row. Then they go down to about a 45-degree angle. Then they go back up at tremendous speed. And by the way, the person that saw this was a trucker. And he's saying that another trucker behind him saw the same thing. November of 1973. Retired policeman. He's fishing in a lake close to Yeehaw Junction. He's out there. He sees something shiny through the bushes. He's thinking for some reason that it's a shiny pickup truck. When he goes there, he sees that it's a UFO that appears to be hovering over like a pond of water and is siphoning the water from the top of it. He was a smart guy. He picked up his stuff and left. Okay. Now in 1977, okay, we have another person describing they're traveling west on Highway 60, just west of Yeehaw Junction, and it's a family who's in the car. And first they say they see that there's fire on the ground, stretching from the north to the south side of the road, and all of a sudden they see what they called a skinny, dark disc-shaped object with a dome top that was laying at a slight angle on the ground. So the sound on what they're describing is a crash. But they're saying the description is that they see no landing gear, and that they're thinking that because of the abrupt that some kind of spark came off when it landed, and that the dry ground around it caught fire. Now they described it as being 50 feet in diameter, 10 feet tall, and they got as close to it as about 100 feet. And they said that they stood there looking at it, and then they got scared, and they just decided, we got to get out of here. Okay? And this, by the way, this came from the case files of the MUFON. Let's fast forward now to February of 2002. There's a guy that posts a blog, and he's saying he's looking for anybody who has information or saw what he saw, which was a formation of amber lights that danced and appeared over the area of Yeehaw Junction. Okay? He's describing where people have posted in different locations about the same event. Okay? Now, he says that it was his car that was being followed and tracked by these UFOs. Okay? And that it was very traumatic. And he says other things happened to him, and to his wife, I guess, was with him, and that I guess he wanted to hook up with somebody who had seen this, I guess, to find out if the same thing was happening to them. And he basically, what he's describing in his posting is that he's at a complete loss to understand. All right, he had left an email which wasn't working because back in a few months ago, December of 2016, somebody posted something there under that post, and it says the exact thing, but for a longer duration, happened to us. This is the man to my wife. And your description of the UFO is exactly the same as what we saw. Wow. Okay, so here we are. Okay. Basically, you've got a land which is a lot older than a lot of people think. Okay. Occupied first by the natives, then the Spaniards, the British. Becomes a state. You've got cattlemen, cowboys, crackers, the Seminole Indians, merchants, prostitutes. You can see what I'm saying. A lot of drama. A lot of tragedy. And I think that you have like little vortex because of those crossroads. Just because, of course, history, human nature, the times. Okay, they said it. Bar fights became shootouts. People got killed. These are the deaths that are documented that we know of. I guarantee you, long before when the law was not around the corner, there was no 911 to call. Those skeletal remains, I bet you there's a lot more out there that have never been found. And I'm going to end this and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why this might be happening at that location or in that general area specifically. All right. And what it is there's something called the folk magic and mythology attached to Crossroads. Okay, because this location is usually considered between the worlds. Okay, and it's at sites like this where supernatural spirits can be contacted and where a lot of paranormal events take place. So it's in Crossroads, it's like neither here nor there. Now, a place where these two roads cross at about right angles, which sometimes, some people call it forks in the road, but a lot of times it's the crossroads. And different religious beliefs and folklores have some version of basically the same conclusion, that it's a place that's usually haunted and visited by supernatural beings, a lot of them malevolent. Now, the way they look at it is the Crossroads is a piece of land that belongs to no one. A lot of times it was a place outside the borders of a town, and a lot of people would think of it also as a suitable site to perform magical rituals and cast spells. Why? Sometimes because of the entities that you do find at Crossroads. All right? Number one, either because they were summoned, or number two, because they were there as part of tragedies that occur there. All right. And let me give you an example, okay, of what I'm talking about. Now, there's a specific type of spiritual entity known as road openers. All right. Now, these beings represent that they bring a great amount of power, and they preside over Crossroads. All right. Now, the idea or the belief system is that you can petition a road opener for either knowledge, information, and if you want to change your destiny, usually if things are going bad for you. Now, what these entities do is they control thresholds and roads, and in a metaphysical way, they determine who has free access and who finds their roads or obstacles in their way. And basically, they're the ones that if you petition them the right way, I guess, or you make the right deal, they point you in the right direction. Otherwise, you wander hopelessly lost. Now, obviously, Crossroads were where people met, travelers met, nomads rendezvoused, where they had the gallows. It's not coincidental that they were placed there. This is where they enacted death penalties, and they would leave those corpses to hang a lot of times as warning for criminals. Okay, and this is also where they buried suicides. You get the drift on this? Now, a lot of times, from what I was researching, magic spells, ritual ceremonies that were done at Crossroads, one of the times that they say that you need to do them or should do them would be at midnight. Okay, normally because during the day, these crossroads, you get a lot of travel, it's a busy place, but at midnight, everybody's gone, and it becomes the realm of the dead. Okay, and this is when you can communicate with whoever, whatever it is that you're trying to strike a deal with. Now, in Christian beliefs, people are usually urged to avoid the crossroads, okay, particularly at night, because it's believed that this is the devil's stomping ground. Okay, in other words, if you were looking to meet Satan, and make a deal with him, a proposition, a request, this is where you were going to find him. All right. Now, like I said, suicides, victims of murders were buried at Crossroads as well. Okay. The reason for this is that these restless souls wouldn't wander around seeking revenge to those who had harmed them, which sometimes were the judges or the police or whoever had executed them. Others, the Christian is that these crossroads, who were kind of roughly in the form of a cross, okay, they basically saw it as a type of protection, okay, that by placing them where there was the sign of the cross, okay, they're going to be protected from the murderous dead. But in truth, the mythology of Crossroads predates Christianity. All right. As a matter of fact, it's like, in other words, that the Crossroads is a gathering place for malevolent entities, not only ghosts, and that this is where you could summon them. Now, again, and in this I even heard that they say that evil ghosts are really confused, okay? And what happens is that these spirits, at night, they stand at the crossroads, and they're there all night trying to make up their mind which way to go. And then, of course, when the sun comes up, they're banished. And also, another belief is that that vampires also gather. The belief in vampires is that where they gather is at night, is at crossroads. And that why? Because this is where they search for fresh victims, which is, again, follows up on that warning: don't be at the crossroads at night. Now, in Western, I want to say Western mythology, and you're going to see that in other mythologies as well, a crossroads sometimes is used to summon a demon to broker a supernatural deal. And you see that in a lot of stories, like in Faust from 1926. The title character, he summons the demon Mephistopheles at a crossroads. The U.S. show Supernatural, which has been running for 10 or 11 seasons. A lot of crossroads demons, you see them in a lot of the different, plots of the different episodes. Now, also there's what they call conjure or root work or hoodoo, okay, which is a combination of African American spirituality, magical spirituality, and one of their beliefs is that if you want to acquire a certain talent or a skill, like if playing a musical instrument, throwing dice, dancing, anything like that, okay, that you visit, that there's a pattern, it's like a spell or a ceremony where you go to a crossroads a certain amount of times, either at dawn or just at midnight or just before dawn, and you're going to meet up with what they call a black man. And many times this is referring to the devil. Okay, because believe it or not, there's people that are even superstitious about calling the devil. So the next best thing is to call him the black man. And what he does is he bestows upon you whatever skill it is that you desire. All right. In the voodoo tradition, which also is, part of the African magical belief system, they call him Papa Legba, and he is considered the Iwa of the crossroads. Some of the other names that they use for this crossroad demon is the rider, the little old funny boy, and the big black man. Okay, so again, this, believe it or not, is, and that's the power of using somebody's or something's name. All right, where some people are, like in Harry Potter, how nobody wants to say he who may not be named Voldemort. It's the same idea, the same belief that by naming something you give it power or you bring it into manifestation around you. Now, one of the real famous in the hoodoo or conjure culture was that everybody said that there was a blues singer by the name of Robert Johnson who supposedly made a crossroads deal to acquire his talent. And basically it wasn't him. It was a guy by the name of Tommy Johnson. Okay? And he's the one that did a song where he describes where he makes a deal with the devil at the crossroads. I want to clarify because a lot of people think it was Robert Johnson. It wasn't Robert Johnson. It was Tommy Johnson. All right. Now, again, and a lot of the people that listen to these blues songs, if you listen to the lyrics of some of these songs, okay, and they're not said exactly, they have certain words that they use when these songs were, written and performed, which was like the 1930s. And one of the songs was that, about selling your soul to the devil at the crossroads. And he, for example, Robert Johnson, he did do a recording called Crossroads, but they're saying that's mostly about hitchhiking, okay? But he was familiar with hoodoo because he had another song titled Hellhound on My Trail. He mentions hot foot powder, and he has another reference to Little Queen of Spades. These are all references to hoodoo and conjure. Now, I'm going to give you an example of one of the ceremonies or rituals you're supposed to do. Okay, for example, for conjure, that you say you go to the crossroads on a Sunday morning before dawn. Okay, you go there for 9 times in succession before the sun comes up, and you make a special wish, a special desire, whatever you want. Okay. Now, if you want to do a conjure and it's going to entail you being a bad person, then the devil comes there. Now, first comes a red rooster. Then after that, the devil sends something else in the shape of a bear. And after that, he himself comes and takes hold of your hand and tells you to go out into the world and do anything that you want to do. By the way, I don't know if you saw that first little clip I did. There's chickens running around in Yeehaw Junction. I didn't realize it then. It was like, okay. Now, another example where Crossroads figure prominently in Brazilian mythology. Okay, they have something called the headless mule, the devil, the besta-feira. Okay, and it's also tied into the Brazilian version of a werewolf. Wow. There's another what they call a left-hand entity. It's called an exus, and as a matter of fact, this is also at Crossroads is where they leave offerings to appease these entities. In the voodoo tradition, Eshu and Legba, are part of that same African deity, and again, they rule the Crossroads. But like I said, the Exus, they associate that with demonic entities such as Lucifer, things of that nature. Now, in closing, they do say positive things can happen at Crossroads. Okay, for example, if you bury 3 pieces of silver at the Crossroads on the night of the full moon, this will shield you from evil, increase your ability to attract love and money. Okay, if you drive a 3-pronged stick painted red and decorated with a black crow feathers into the ground at the Crossroads, your psychic powers will increase and you will gain mystical abilities. Okay, also, so if you gather certain stones at the Crossroads, they can protect you from evil. And as long as you carry that rock in your pocket or your purse, you get that protection. And stones gathered at the Crossroads on a full moon always protect you and the ones you love. Okay, but again, everybody that was providing this information that I researched, they also have to be really, really careful, because the ghosts that haunt these Crossroads tend to latch onto you and become very troublesome. And one of the things that I found was that, the thing about, not looking back, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah from the Bible or everything. One of the things that they tell people when I was doing the research, that if you ever do any rituals or offerings at Crossroads, you never look back, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to leave whatever it is that you left there, sometimes, which was, also if you're trying to get rid of, if you've used items in rituals or ceremonies and you're trying to get rid of negative stuff and you leave it at the Crossroads, in other words, you dispose of it at the Crossroads, you better leave. And the reasons why it's left at the Crossroads is so that it will not follow you home, whatever it was, especially if it was an entity. Okay, and that because of the high volume of traffic, it'll be carried off, which is what that warning comes into about negative things latching onto you if you do go to Crossroads to do any type of magic or ceremony. Interesting, huh? So you see, there's more to it than just this lonely little outpost where crackers used to drive cattle. Okay? And like I said, this is stuff that's just been documented that you can research. I'm sure there's so much more out there, such more other mysteries. I mean, let's face it, UFOs, oh wow. Anyway, I hope you liked it. I hope you liked this little piece of Florida history and paranormal and supernatural. And I think that, sometimes a lot of people think that you have to travel far away to find all these interesting places and legends and mysteries. And sometimes you're right. You've got them right underfoot. And all you need to do is just take a different look at what's there and do a little bit of research, which thanks to the internet we can do easily. But even if you have to take a trip to the library, it's like, it doesn't hurt. I don't know about you, but like I said, I'm a research geek and I love to find out all these interesting things. And there was a lot more, but I had to pare it down because if not, I'd have a 4-hour video. So anyway, guys, I hope you liked this video. I hope you subscribe to my channel. I hope you're going to join me every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube for Stories of the Supernatural. Okay? So you can see all the guests I'm interviewing. But for example, this show right here, I'm going to let this fly. It's not going to be on a Friday. So if you subscribe, and you can set up notifications. So if I release this, okay, you can get a hold of it. And like I mentioned, I do a lot of live streaming on Twitter and on Facebook when I'm out in the field. So if you could find me on Twitter, Miami Ghost Chronicles, Twitter or Facebook, and hook up there, you can also catch me when I live stream, which is usually when I'm out in the field, trekking around, and a lot of unusual things happen. So again, take care, guys. It's Friday. Have a good weekend. Take care. I hope you like it. See ya.